Mike Jones is with us. Mike has been a guest of ours previously when he had his Lignite Energy Council hat on. He is now retired as Vice President of Research and Development, which means he can really lay it on now. He's unencumbered by the boss or anything. He can get right to it. Mike, I'm looking forward for the chat with the unshackled Mike Jones. This should be fun. How are you?
I'm doing well, Scott. Yourself?
Very good. Appreciate the time. You and I have talked about this before, but I don't think we can talk about it enough because the lignite industry is really an innovator, always investing in tomorrow's technologies, but doesn't really get much credit for it because much of the opposition is loud, number one, and they like to yell dirty, coal, terrible, awful, and it's hard to break through the noise. But I want to have you break through the noise a little bit and talk a little bit about some of the technologies out there that are happening and the progress being made on capturing and storing carbon dioxide.
Well, I appreciate that chance to talk about something that I feel very strongly about. I spent pretty much my whole career looking at issues that relate to the opportunity to make good use of our plentiful resources here in the U.S. and North Dakota in particular with our lignite coal. And I would agree. The Lignite Council and the lignite industry in general has been a real leader in trying to be very proactive in finding new and better ways to make use of that resource.
Yeah, so very important, specifically here in North Dakota at our own lignite-based power plants over about the past decade. These technologies have been given some real, oomph and investment. Talk a little bit about what you see as the way of progress and what you now see coming of that after all that work over the last years.
Well, as you said, it has been an ongoing process for a number of years, and the Lignite Council, I think when you and I have talked before, Scott, I started out my career at the Energy and Environmental Research Center at the University of North Dakota, where I did work on coal technologies for about 30 years prior to joining the Lignite Council. And as you said, it's been a range of different things. It's been everything from trying to find ways to change the characteristics of the lignite. And as you know, the lignite is a material which has a lot of moisture in it, which can be a negative, but it's one of the most reactive materials that we do have. So for technologies like gasification or some of the newer technologies that are being looked at, like the alum cycle, I think that's going to be a real benefit because it's going to allow you to do things faster than you would with other types of fuels. And so those have been some of the things. And as you know, the Great Plains Synfuel plant is a classic example. That was done many years ago, started back in the 80s, taken over by Basin Electric, and has been run as the Dakota Gasification for a number of years. And it's been very successful, proven that you can commercially do that. Now, rather than just producing syngas, they produce a whole slate of products, all kinds of things which provide good jobs in North Dakota, valuable resources for the state and for the region. Things that wouldn't have happened if it wouldn't have been for the willingness to take some risk and to try things that hadn't been done before. And that's all been part of the legacy, I think, of the lignite industry in North Dakota. Today, and we talked about this before, we have technologies like the alum cycle. This is what I call a truly revolutionary attempt to try something very different with our lignite coals, involving gasification on the front end, combustion, and no longer using water or steam as the working fluid, but supercritical CO2, so that you actually create a pure stream of CO2 in the process of releasing the energy. Truly innovative. Unfortunately, their demonstration plant is down in Houston. I don't know exactly what's happened to it, but my hope is that, it was about ready to start. They were going to start it up on natural gas later this year. And my hope is that hasn't been put back too far. But as you and I both know, there's been some real issues down in Houston, and we'll see what happens. You take a look at some of the other things. Our friends at Minnesota Power, along with Minnesota Power and their the company which is called Elite, which has a clean energy group within that, are working to take and put CO2 capture on the back end of the Milton R. Young station out by Center, North Dakota, as we speak. This is kind of a follow-on to an activity that's already happened called Petronova down again outside of Houston, where they are using an amine-based scrubber to separate the CO2, and they've got a pipeline into an oil field right there where they can sell that, produce additional oil, and pay for a lot of the cost of doing that. So, our friends up here in North Dakota are saying, okay, if they could do it at that scale, we're going to do it a little bigger with a different system, different kind of fuel, and prove that this has applicability to a number of different technologies. And, of course, if you look at where a lot of this started, and we have to go back to about 2004 to look at that, when the Lignite Council was one of the early sponsors of a program called PCOR, Plains CO2 Reduction Partnership, talking about reducing CO2 in a way which made business sense as well as sense in terms of reducing the CO2 footprint is something that's been worked on for many, many years. And they were one of the early sponsors. That was the phase one in 2003. We're now in phase three, which is demonstrating that we can do this. And there's actually a demonstration going on where they are sequestering the CO2 by producing additional oil in one of the oil fields in the southeast corner of Montana, which extends into North Dakota, by the way. So the hope is that as that continues to move forward, we're going to be doing the same thing in North Dakota. Again, more wealth, more jobs, more opportunities for our state based on using the new technologies to do things better and smarter for the future.
Yeah, and what's amazing, it seems to me, just in the conversations I've had over the years about these technologies versus the conversations we have now, the pace of which the needle is moving is really pretty amazing, right? So let's just use a telephone as an example. Go back to Alexander Graham Bell to where we are today. That didn't happen overnight. But, when you look at the pace at which it's happening now, just look, the iPhone didn't exist. However, was it just 10 years old or something like that? I forget how old it is. Not very old. And,
That's right.
you just got an enormous amount of transformational change on the technology that comes once that curve begins. That's really what's happening with this, isn't it?
It is. And as you say, as we have success with one, we build on that and continue to do more, look at better ways to accomplish that. This has been the history of the industry for some time. I was a part of it when the first scrubbers were put on some of the plants for for sulfur back in the late 70s, early 80s. And if we could do 70%, we thought we were really doing very, very well. Today, 95% or 98% is just normal. And it's cheaper than it ever was then. And we're seeing the same thing happen as we look at some of the options that we're trying to commercialize today. And, of course, CO2 is the one that's got everybody's attention. But what we need to be able to do is to talk about that as a business opportunity. That's the way it's going to be done, and that's the way we're going to see that happen for the future.
Very interesting. Well, appreciate the update as always, and I hope you're enjoying retirement, but I can tell you're still thinking about all the things that kept you busy in your time at the Lignite Energy Council, right?
Well, I sure am, and it's the kinds of things that I really enjoyed, and I still do. So appreciate the chance to talk about it, Scott.
Look forward to doing it again. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it very much. Mike Jones, who's now retired from the Lignite Energy Council, once Vice President of Research and Development there.